Right now, at this exact second, a massive multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 company is bleeding out.
And the people running it have absolutely no idea.
Exactly. I mean, they have these pristine, honest buildings, thousands of brilliant employees, and balance sheets that look mathematically perfectly stable. The revenue isn't crashing, the stock isn't in free fall,
Right. On paper, they look indestructible.
but they are dying because they are deploying massive amounts of capital and human genius to fight a war on completely the wrong battlefield. And the only thing standing between that global behemoth and total irreversible irrelevance is a 24-year-old consultant.
A 24-year-old sitting in a sterile room, drawing a diagnostic framework on the back of an envelope.
It's wild. But we are opening up an exclusive stack of case interview masterclasses today. And on the surface, if you just glance at these sources, they look like, standard training materials used to screen elite consultants for top-tier
Yeah, it
firms.
looks like a job prep exercise for MBAs.
Right. But if you look at the underlying mechanics, this is a masterclass in global business survival. We are uncovering the hidden architecture of strategic decision-making.
And we're looking at the structural market forces that dictate who actually wields power, who absorbs capital, and who gets inevitably destroyed in the corporate arena.
Because it is an arena. And to survive it, you have to understand the exact frameworks these elite minds use to diagnose corporate failure.
But even more critically, we have to look at how these multi-billion-dollar advisory firms filter the human beings tasked with making these calls in the first place.
Yes. The psychological gauntlet these candidates are forced to run tells us everything about what the corporate world actually values when survival is on the line. And as we deconstruct this, we're going to reveal the specific skill set that actually propels people to the absolute peak of the corporate pyramid.
A skill set, by the way, that the most prestigious elite business schools in the world actively refuse to teach.
Which is just crazy to me. But to understand the top of the pyramid, we have to examine the front door first, the recruitment filter.
Right. So the sources indicate that these hyper-analytical, data-driven firms are increasingly utilizing collaborative group case interviews. They put four competing candidates in a room and tell them to solve a complex business problem as a team.
Which is a brilliant trap.
Wait, but it contradicts the entire premise of these firms, doesn't it? If you're an elite consultancy obsessed with mathematical rigor, why are you using a group setting to test personality? Aren't you just looking for the most brilliant human calculator available?
Well, you would assume the objective is simply to find the person who can build the most complex financial model in the shortest amount of time.
Right.
But the recruitment system is not just an intelligence test, it is a behavioral risk mitigation filter.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
These firms have realized that if their manufacturing line produces a brilliant analyst who fundamentally alienates clients, they have a defective product. They are testing for a very specific failure condition. They want to see if you're going to walk into a room and pull a Goodwill Hunting.
Ah, the arrogant genius routine. Exactly. If you project this attitude of, I am from Harvard, my test scores are higher than yours, and therefore we are executing my framework, you are instantly rejected.
Even if your math is completely flawless.
Even if your math is flawless.
Right.
Because you have to consider the structural stakes of the business model. This firm is going to take a 24-year-old who just graduated, put them in a tailored suit, and sit them across the table from a 55-year-old CEO of a global logistics company.
Right. A CEO who has spent 30 years building an empire.
Yes. A CEO who knows every single supply chain route by heart and who is paying the consultancy $10 million for advice.
Yeah.
If that young consultant goes in with an abrasive, condescending attitude, they don't just ruin a Tuesday afternoon meeting. They threaten a massive recurring revenue stream.
They permanently damage the firm's global reputation. So they're basically simulating the high-stress, high-stakes environment of a client boardroom.
Precisely. Because if you can't suppress your ego in an interview room where you consciously know you are being evaluated for a job,
You are absolutely going to crack when you are exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep on a Thursday afternoon in a hostile client environment.
exactly. The ideal candidate demonstrates what they call polite, constructive friction.
Polite friction, I like that.
It's the ability to look at a competitor in the group and say, that is a solid baseline, but what if we adjust the geographic variables? They're testing your capacity to synthesize conflicting information collectively without letting your ego destroy the structural integrity of the process.
That makes total sense. And there is a fascinating paradox here regarding how we view the people actually administering these tests. We culturally elevate these interviewers into omniscient, cruel gatekeepers executing elaborate psychological torture.
Oh, absolutely. We think they're playing 4D chess.
But the reality is heavily dictated by the banality of corporate life. I mean, there's this detail in the source material, the ice skating reality. It strips away all the mythology of the omnipotent corporate partner.
I love this example. So imagine the architecture of the firm on a random Tuesday in February. A partner is billing out at $1,000 an hour. They have a flight to Frankfurt in 3 hours. They are putting out a massive fire with a pharmaceutical client.
They are stressed beyond belief.
Beyond belief. And suddenly, HR taps them on the shoulder and says, you are scheduled to interview a candidate in 3 minutes.
And the partner is completely unprepared.
Completely. They're walking down the hallway exhausted, just trying to clear their mind. They look out the window at Rockefeller Center, they see people ice skating in the snow, and they think, all right, I'm doing an ice skating case.
They literally invent it on the spot.
Yes. They walk into the room and ask the candidate to calculate the daily profit margin of that specific ice rink.
Which is wild. They are literally inventing a multivariable business scenario out of thin air just to get through their Tuesday.
They aren't executing a pre-planned Machiavellian trap. They're just trying to get you off their to-do list.
But in doing so, they are applying the ultimate pressure test.
Exactly. Can your brain take a totally random, unstructured problem, an ice skating rink, and instantly apply a logical architecture to it?
Right. Do you panic, or do you calmly start estimating square footage, skater density, ticket pricing, and the hourly cost of Zamboni maintenance?
That's the test. And that brings us to the core of how that architecture is actually built.
Yeah.
Because when these vetted, highly filtered minds sit down to diagnose a failing company, there is one foundational law that dictates their entire approach.
And what is that?
Averages lie.
Averages lie.
Numbers in a vacuum are not just meaningless. They are actively dangerous.
Because the human brain relies on averages since they're cognitively inexpensive, right? They provide a simple singular narrative that requires very little processing power.
Yes, exactly. But in the architecture of global commerce, the average is an illusion designed to hide existential threats.
Wow.
The primary weapon of the strategist is the rule of comparisons and segmentation. A data point only gains value when forced into a historical trend line or measured against an industry benchmark.
And a total aggregate number is completely useless until you violently break it apart into its component segments.
Right. And the safe neighborhood analogy illustrates the experiential danger of this perfectly.
Oh, yeah. Let's break that down for everyone. So, you look at the crime statistics for a sprawling city block, and the data shows there are only 10 robberies per 100,000 residents over the last year.
Right. Statistically, mathematically, that is an incredibly safe neighborhood.
The average tells the mayor, the police chief, and the residents that everything is perfectly secure.
But if you take that aggregate data and you segment it geographically, a completely different reality emerges.
You map the incidents and realize that all 10 of those robberies happened at your specific house.
Yes, and suddenly, the average of the neighborhood is completely irrelevant to your survival. Statistically, the block is a haven of safety. Experientially, you are being actively hunted.
That is terrifying.
The conclusion drawn from the average is that you should relax. The conclusion drawn from the segmented data is that you need to pack your bags and move immediately.
And that translates directly to the corporate world, what they call the 100% versus negative 25% trap.
Exactly. Imagine a CEO sits in a quarterly board meeting and projects the annual report onto the screen. Total corporate sales are completely flat year over year, 0% growth.
The board breathes a sigh of relief. I mean, it's not hypergrowth, but it's stability. The ship is steady in choppy waters.
And that is the exact mechanism by which legacy companies quietly bleed to death. Because if you do not segment that perfectly flat 0%, you are blind to the underlying structural collapse.
Right, because what if segment A, which represents your legacy core business like 80% of your total revenue, is actually declining by 25%?
It is in a death spiral.
But segment B, a tiny experimental digital unit that makes up only 20% of your business, is growing at 100% a year.
It is experiencing massive, unconstrained hypergrowth.
So the aggregate average equals 0.
Yes. But underneath that 0, your entire historical foundation is evaporating, and a massive new world order is exploding.
If you manage the company based on the aggregate, you manage for stability. You make minor operational tweaks. When in reality, this segmented data screams that you need to execute a violent, massive pivot away from your core identity.
And this is why so many household names just vanish. They manage the average until they die.
If you value these kinds of long-form breakdowns that actually explain the hidden gears of the world, make sure you hit the like button on this deep dive. It helps us keep bringing you this level of analysis. So let's ground this in a highly detailed, real-world application from the sources.
Okay.
The diagnostic case study of a global advertising agency. Let's call them Omega and Omega. This is a billion-dollar legacy behemoth. They have the premium real estate in Manhattan. They serve the largest consumer packaged goods companies on earth.
The absolute top of the food chain.
Exactly. But they bring in a consultancy because they have hit a terrifying wall. For 3 consecutive years, their global sales and their profit margins have been mathematically flat. Zero growth.
Omega and Omega represents the ultimate stress test for the framework we just established. So the consultant arrives and immediately applies an internal profitability framework. They start segmenting the internal data.
Okay, so they look at the cost side of the ledger first. Have internal operational costs skyrocketed?
No, costs are perfectly stable.
Have salaries bloated?
No.
Okay, so they look at the revenue side. Has the revenue per account dropped?
No.
Has the total number of accounts decreased?
No. The internal mechanics of the company are perfectly stagnant. There is no operational inefficiency to fix.
Which is usually the moment an internal management team panics and starts firing middle managers to artificially boost the margin, right?
Exactly. They try to cut their way to growth. But the consultant pivots away from the internal data entirely. They apply the rule of comparison to the external environment.
Yeah.
And they discover that while Omega is flatlining at 0% growth, the overall global advertising industry's profits are actually up 5%.
Oh, wow. So the entire narrative of the crisis just inverted.
Completely. This is no longer a story about a company failing to optimize its internal operations. This is a story about a massive entity completely failing to capture structural market growth. It is an external crisis, not an internal one.
But wait, how does a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, armed with armies of analysts and industry data, completely miss the fact that their core market is growing without them? How can you be that well-resourced and that blind simultaneously?
Because the executives at Omega are trapped in the illusion of the average. They see that the broad industry is up 5% and they rationalize it.
They tell themselves they're just having a slow cycle.
Right, a temporary dip.
Okay.
And they assume they will eventually revert to the mean. They do not segment the market. So the consultant steps in and violently breaks that 5% average apart.
Into structural categories.
Yes. They segment the advertising industry into global legacy agencies, which is Omega's category direct response, media buying, and interactive digital advertising.
And when you look at the growth rates of those specific segments, the blood just drains from the executives' faces. Because the global legacy agency segment isn't flat, it is actively shrinking.
Omega is actually overperforming just to maintain their flat 0%.
That's crazy. And meanwhile, the interactive digital advertising segment is growing at an astonishing 30% per year.
The battlefield has not just shifted, the entire geography of the war has relocated.
Yeah.
Omega didn't suddenly forget how to make brilliant, emotionally resonant television commercials. They still have the best directors, the best copywriters, the best account managers in the world.
So what's the problem?
The existential terror is that they are absolute masters of a game that the global market has decided it no longer wants to play.
That is brutal. So the consultant has to dig into the demand side to understand why this structural shift is happening. Why are Fortune 500 brand divisions suddenly starving their legacy agency partners and pouring billions of dollars into upstart digital firms?
Well, to understand the demand side of corporate capital, you have to look at the end consumer. You analyze the viewership data. And the consultant shows that television, radio, and print viewership, the mediums Omega dominates, are in a state of terminal decline.
Meanwhile, internet usage and digital consumption are compounding exponentially.
Exactly. The massive Fortune 500 advertisers are not making a philosophical choice. They're simply following the eyeballs. The migration of human attention is fundamentally altering the flow of global ad spend.
And the underlying economics of this shift are incredibly brutal for Omega, because the sources reveal a massive disparity in capital efficiency here.
Right, the commission structures.
Yeah. Traditional legacy agencies like Omega are locked into a standard 15% commission structure on their media buys. It's an industry standard that has existed for decades. But these new digital agencies, because they offer precise targeting and measurable ROI, are commanding a 20% commission.
It isn't just that the clients prefer digital, it's that the digital sector is structurally more profitable.
It's a gold rush.
And this is the exact moment the consultant has to deliver the devastating reality of internal limitations. Omega has a fundamental existential mismatch. They are optimized perfectly for a dying ecosystem, and they have zero infrastructure in a booming high-margin ecosystem.
They cannot solve this by tweaking their internal operations.
No, they cannot solve this by firing the CEO and bringing in a new visionary either. They are facing a structural imperative that forces them into the ultimate corporate dilemma. Do you spend years trying to build this new capability internally, or do you take your capital and die it?
The acquisition imperative. Omega realizes they are bleeding out. They need interactive digital capabilities, and they need them yesterday.
Exactly.
But trying to build a cutting-edge digital division from scratch inside the bureaucratic architecture of a legacy television agency is going to take, what, 5 years?
At least. And the market is moving at 30% a year. If they wait 5 years to build, they are bankrupt.
They don't have the luxury of time, so they are forced to buy. They target a fast-growing, highly profitable digital firm, let's call them eCool.
Which triggers the M&A fit framework. Mergers and acquisitions.
Right.
You take the structural reality of company A, you take the structural reality of company B, and you attempt to mathematically map out the future state of the combined entity. You are hunting for synergies, you assess the overlap in customer bases, the overlap in product offerings, and the compatibility of organizational culture.
Let me throw an analogy at this to contextualize the severity of what Omega is trying to do here.
Yeah.
Because to me, this is like a legacy luxury mechanical watchmaker, a company that has spent 100 years perfecting microscopic gears and springs, suddenly realizing the entire world only wants smartwatches.
Yeah, exactly.
So instead of trying to teach their metallurgists how to code operating systems, they just fly to Silicon Valley, buy a software startup, and try to smash the two companies together. But I have to ask, can you really just bolt a tech company onto a legacy brand and expect the machinery to turn?
Well, to push your smartwatch analogy further, the tension isn't just about learning to write software. It's the fact that the watchmaker's entire physical and operational factory is built from metal, not code.
Right.
But if you look strictly at the spreadsheet, this Omega and eCool merger looks mathematically flawless. I mean, look at the customer synergy. eCool, the digital firm, derives 80% of its revenue from the interactive digital divisions of Fortune 500 companies. Omega derives 80% of its revenue from the traditional brand marketing divisions of those exact same companies.
So there is almost zero overlap.
Which means instant cross-selling, no cannibalization of existing accounts. Omega can walk into their legacy clients tomorrow and immediately sell them premium digital services through eCool.
And the product synergy mirrors that perfection, right? Omega produces 60-second, high-budget television spots and emotional branding campaigns. eCool produces database marketing, predictive statistical models, and targeted digital banners.
They do not compete with each other. On paper, this is a slam dunk. The numbers align with absolute precision.
But this is where the pristine math of the spreadsheet collides with the messy, irrational reality of human beings. We have to dive into the second and third order effects that actually dictate whether an acquisition survives or implodes.
Cultural warfare.
Cultural warfare.
This is the hidden variable that destroys billions of dollars of shareholder value every year. You are taking Omega, an empire built entirely on the culture of the artist.
Right. These are people who worship intuition, emotional resonance, and unquantifiable beauty.
They believe in the magic of a campaign that makes a consumer feel something profound. You cannot run an A/B test on a feeling.
And they are being forced into a corporate marriage with eCool, an empire built entirely on the culture of the PhD.
These are data scientists, predictive modelers, and algorithmic engineers. To them, marketing is not art. It is pure, ruthless math.
It is about cracking an IP address, measuring a click-through rate, and guaranteeing a specific return on investment.
Yes, and the epistemological clash between these two worldviews is absolute. They fundamentally do not speak the same language.
The source material highlights a staggering, terrifying reality for corporate boards here. The number one reason massive Fortune 500 mergers fail is not because the financial modeling was wrong.
No.
It is not because the macroeconomic environment shifted. It is because the human beings trapped in the room together literally despise each other.
Think about the boardroom dynamics. The artist pitches a $5 million conceptual campaign based on a feeling. The PhD demands a predictive ROI model before approving the budget.
The artist feels creatively suffocated and insulted.
And the PhD views the artist as a reckless gambler setting fire to corporate capital. The resentment becomes toxic.
It poisons the operational well. So if the consultant recognizes this cultural chasm, their recommendation cannot just be about integrating software system.
Absolutely not. To ensure the survival of this multi-billion-dollar acquisition, the consultant has to mandate structural separation.
Right. They literally tell them to stay away from each other.
They have to tell the CEO of Omega, you must keep these two cultures in completely separate buildings. Do not integrate their management. Do not force the intuitive artist and the algorithmic PhD to share a cafeteria, or their mutual disdain will rip the combined entity apart from the inside.
The human element completely overrides the mathematical synergy. I'm sure there is a massive segment of the audience listening right now who has lived through this exact nightmare. If you have survived a corporate restructuring or a merger that looked brilliant on a McKinsey PowerPoint slide, but was a toxic, miserable disaster in reality, an artist versus PhD war, share that story in the comments. I'd love to read them.
Oh, the ground truth of these integrations is almost always messier than the boardroom theory.
It is a universal corporate trauma. And analyzing that trauma transitions us into understanding the specific type of mind required to navigate this chaos. We have deconstructed the frameworks, the market forces, the M&A tension, but who are the individuals actually driving this strategic architecture?
Right. How do these frameworks apply to the trajectory of human capital?
Let's examine what the sources call the strategist's paradox. If you look at the life cycle of an elite consultant, you are hired out of business school entirely for your analytical processing power.
Your ability to crunch the Omega data, segment the market, and build the M&A synergy models in your first 2 years.
But there's a massive cultural assumption we need to challenge here. In modern business culture, we absolutely worship the nonlinear creative visionaries, the Steve Jobs, the Richard Bransons, the Elon Musks. We view them as the pinnacle of business genius.
We do.
So naturally, we assume a Steve Jobs type would absolutely dominate a case interview and be the ultimate strategic consultant.
It is the most common assumption, and it is entirely structurally incorrect.
Really? Break that down.
The source material breaks down this paradox with incredible clarity. Nonlinear visionaries make astonishingly terrible consultants.
Why?
While yes, they make incredible CEOs, they build world-changing products, they redefine industries, and they accumulate billions in wealth. But their cognitive processing is entirely internal and heavily reliant on intuition.
Right.
A visionary can jump from product design to supply chain logistics to a 10-year macroeconomic forecast in a single afternoon, making massive leaps of faith without a single point of hard data to back it up.
They operate on gut instinct about a future that doesn't exist yet.
But a strategic consultant is structurally forbidden from operating on gut instinct.
Ah.
A consultant requires data. More critically, a consultant requires the ability to construct a client-friendly, logical, step-by-step bridge of evidence.
Yeah, because if a 28-year-old consultant walks into the boardroom of a Fortune 500 company and says, we need to liquidate your legacy business and pivot to digital because my intuition tells me it's the future, security will physically escort them out of the building.
You cannot sell a leap of faith to a corporate board. You have to sell the demographic shift, the 30% segment growth rate, the margin differential.
It is the fundamental difference between a venture capitalist and a corporate strategist.
Exactly. A venture capitalist looks at a nascent, chaotic market with zero historical data and places a high-risk bet on human potential. A consultant looks at vast, existing oceans of data to optimize, restructure, and protect an already massive entity. They are completely divergent cognitive skill sets.
And this structured, segmented way of thinking becomes so deeply ingrained in the consultant's neural pathways that it actually begins to infect their personal life. The source material provides this incredible, hilariously bleak example of the Marrying Joe framework.
It demonstrates the absolute inability to turn off the analytical machinery.
Tell the story. It's amazing.
Okay, so a friend comes to a seasoned consultant and asks a deeply human, emotional question. Should I marry Joe?
A normal human being would ask about love, emotional support, shared values.
Right, but the consultant's brain instantly, violently segments the problem.
They can't help it. They immediately build a matrix.
They look at the friend and say, let's break this massive, abstract, existential question down into its 4 component variables. What do you want your life to look like in 20 years regarding geography, lifestyle, children, and travel?
And the friend, probably slightly confused, says, I want to live in California. I want a high-income lifestyle, I want 3 kids, and I want to travel internationally 3 times a year.
And then the consultant cross-references Joe against the future growth metrics.
It's so cold.
Exactly. They run the data on Joe. Joe explicitly hates the West Coast. Joe wants 0 children. Joe has no interest in international travel.
So the consultant processes this and delivers a perfectly synthesized, client-friendly conclusion.
Based on a qualitative segment analysis, you have a negative synergy with Joe across 100% of your future growth metrics. Do not marry Joe.
It is mathematically flawless, highly effective risk mitigation, and completely, utterly devoid of human romance.
It is the ultimate sterilization of the human experience.
But it brings us to the final, most profound irony of the elite corporate ecosystem. We have spent this entire deep dive establishing how ruthlessly analytical, structured, and data-obsessed you must be to survive the recruitment filter.
You survive the ice skating case, you diagnose the Omega market shift, you build the M&A cultural framework, you segment everything.
But if you want to reach the absolute apex of the pyramid, if you want to become a senior partner, a rainmaker, the person actually wielding global power, the required skill set completely inverts.
It's a complete 180.
You do not reach the top by being the best mathematician. You reach the top through a dirty 5-letter word, sales.
It is the ultimate hidden reality of the professional services industry. You are hired for your math, but you are promoted to partner for your sales.
To ascend to the throne, you must possess the ability to sit in a private dining room with a Fortune 500 CEO, build profound interpersonal trust, and convince them to spend $20 million on a consulting engagement they didn't even know they needed.
It is enterprise sales at the highest conceivable level. And what is truly staggering is the academic prejudice against this reality.
The source material highlights an analysis of the course catalogs from the most elite institutions on Earth, Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, the very institutions tasked with manufacturing the global elite.
And what do they find?
Harvard Business School offered 0 courses dedicated to sales. Stanford offered 0. Wharton offered 1.
These institutions essentially pretend that the mechanics of sales do not exist.
Right. In the academic hierarchy, sales is treated as a blue-collar, unscientific endeavor, interpersonal manipulation, something you hire someone to do on a used car lot, not something a master of the universe engages in.
And yet sales is the sole engine that drives the revenue side of literally every profit and loss statement in existence. It is the singular skill that dictates who controls the flow of capital at the top-tier consulting firms, law firms, and investment banks globally.
It exposes a massive structural blind spot in how we educate the next generation of global leaders. Because if you extrapolate the trends of the next decade, the global business landscape is not going to stabilize.
It is going to experience faster, more violent structural shifts.
Exactly. The internet disrupted Omega and Omega. But the integration of artificial intelligence, the rewiring of geopolitical supply chains, and massive demographic inversions are going to disrupt the next generation of behemoths.
The leaders who survive this coming era will not just be human calculators. They will be the rare hybrids who can blend the rigorous, ruthless data segmentation of a junior analyst with the high-level empathetic relationship management, the sales capability of a senior partner.
If you internalize these frameworks, if you truly understand how to segment an aggregate number, how to identify an external market shift before it destroys your core business, how to predict the cultural failure of a massive merger, you fundamentally rewire how you perceive global events.
You stop seeing static companies, and you start seeing the entire global economy as a fragile architecture of moving, interconnected variables.
The next time you see a headline announcing that a legacy retail giant is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, you won't just passively accept the narrative of bad management.
You will see the unsegmented average that blinded their boardroom. You will see the flat revenue line that disguised their dying core.
And when you see a shocking multi-billion-dollar merger announced between a legacy manufacturer and a Silicon Valley startup, you will immediately know the hidden mathematical synergies, the desperate need for capability, and the absolute cultural warfare that is about to erupt in their cafeterias.
You are no longer just reading the news, you are reading the matrix of global power.
And maintaining that clarity, keeping that analytical lens sharp, is the entire purpose of deconstructing these systems. Which is exactly why, if you want to continue seeing the unseen structures of commerce, power, and strategy, you need to make sure you are subscribed to the deep dive. This is how we ensure you never miss the mechanics behind the headlines.
It's all about looking past the obvious.
But I want to leave you with one final, unresolved tension to think about as you walk away. We talked extensively about the cultural war between the intuitive artist and the algorithmic PhD.
Right.
Right now, artificial intelligence is rapidly becoming the ultimate PhD. It is a predictive engine capable of executing the mathematical modeling of 10,000 data scientists in a fraction of a second. As that capability becomes commoditized, as everyone gains access to perfect segmented data, will the pendulum violently swing back? In a hyper-quantified world, will the messy, intuitive, entirely unquantifiable artist once again become the most scarce and therefore the most valuable asset in the corporate boardroom? Think about it. We will see you on the next deep dive.